Hello everybody and welcome back to the Eureka Centre here in UCC. And as you can see from our screen, today we're going to have a look at the use of rubrics to assess learning outcomes. Now, a rubric, as you can see from the definition there, it's a scoring tool. It's often referred to as a rating scale, and it shows the performance that you expect from the students regarding the work that they submit to you. Rubrics basically consist of criteria that you will use to assess that piece of work. And usually the rubric is presented in the form of a matrix. And in this short presentation, we'll show you lots of examples of what I mean there. So the rubric is really all about expectations and making it clear to students the expectation that you have for the work submitted. It's ideal, of course, for formative assessment, because it will help to guide the students in presenting future work to you. And a big advantage to the teacher is that it saves you time and energy in providing detailed feedback. And again, we'll come back to that point in a moment later on in this presentation. Now, the great advantage of rubrics is that they go across all types of assessments. You might give them a project, you might give your students a peer group presentation where they have to present their project to the rest of the class. You might give them an essay, they might have a written assignment, or they might be involved in group project work, for example. And what the rubric does is it's a sort of grading guide for you to help you provide formative assessment without having to go to the trouble of writing an individual report for each student. The rubric will do the work for you. So the various levels of achievement make the grading that you have assigned very clear to the students. Now, there are two types of rubrics described in the literature, and we'll have a quick look at holistic rubrics and a more detailed look at analytic rubrics. Firstly, what's a holistic rubric? It's sort of an impressionistic mark, really. It's where the overall assignment is scored, but each part of the assignment aren't awarded separate marks. So it's all about overall quality. And it tends to be used mainly for summative assessment. That is where you would be interested in just giving a mark and you won't be giving much feedback, or you're giving very limited feedback to the student. So let's have a look there at a sample of a holistic scoring rubric. Now, as you can see here, the person who designed this rubric, it scores from 1 up to 6. So there are 6 categories. And now for each of the examples of rubrics that I'm giving in this talk, I'm acknowledging the source along the bottom. So here, this is for marking an essay. The essay does not state the student's position on the issue, it restates the position presented on the assignment, so this is a very weak writer. Then the average writer, the essay states a position, raises a counter argument, there's well developed, leaning towards the trivial, the essay may also seem disorganized, those sorts of things. And then up the top, then excellent writer, strong position, raises the counter argument. The essay tackles a significant objection or counter argument. It's not a trivial one, and so on. So you clearly have 6 categories into which the person who is marking the assignment will place each student. This is an oral presentation. Again, notice at the bottom the source of this rubric. Okay, so one would be a poor presentation without stating the question, the topic is unclear, no adequate conclusions, the delivery is difficult to follow, no indication of preparation or organisation. So pretty poor there. Up then, to good. Supporting information is not as strong as in the other categories. The delivery and sentence structures are generally correct. Some indications of preparation and organisation. And then at the top, you have the excellent student, who ticks all the boxes. Here's another example of a holistic rubric for mathematical reasoning. Again, the student has failed to come up with any clear, appropriate or reasonable strategy for solving the problem down in number 1, whereas way up in number 4, develops fully a methodological plan for solving the problem. The approach taken is appropriate, well thought out, based on reasonable data and strategies, up to number 5, which is again the outstanding student. Now, I want to concentrate mainly on analytic rubrics, because I find these are the ones I use myself, and I find them to be most helpful to students, and they are a big improvement, I see, on the holistic type of rubric. Now, this is where you have different criteria and you're giving more focused feedback to the students. So you're talking about the strengths and the weaknesses of the students, and you're pointing them out to them. So these are particularly good for formative feedback. I would also always recommend to you, when designing these types of analytic rubrics, that you develop 4 categories. The ranging from the poor to the excellent, and then 2 categories for the in-between, I feel is sufficient. Now, this is a rubric that I came across for assessing a student presentation online when I was looking myself to develop a rubric. The nice thing about rubrics is that there's loads of them online and you don't have to start with a blank page. So I took this rubric and modified it for my own uses. Now, my main job is training science teachers in this university. And as part of the training process throughout the various years, every year students have to perform in front of their peers and present the findings of a project that they have carried out. It might be something, say, on the teaching of magnetism to a junior cycle student, or the teaching of thermodynamics to a leaving cert chemistry class, or whatever. Now, what I have here is I've actually put in the marks that are allocated to each part. So 20% organisation, 50% subject knowledge, 10% graphics, 10% spelling and grammar, 10% clarity of speech. And then under each of the 4 categories, as you can see there, I put in the criteria. So the audience cannot understand, there's no sequencing of information. Up to here, information is presented in a logical, interesting sequence which the audience can follow. So being able to structure their presentation would be very important for these future science teachers. Then ensuring that they have a grasp of the subject, that they can answer questions, that they can elaborate on the questions. Are the outstanding students, not only can they answer questions, but they can explain in more detail the answers and elaborate. Likewise in the graphics, are they just presenting PowerPoints, for example, to their peers in which there are no graphics to illustrate the text? Or do the graphics that they've chosen and developed reinforce the text and the presentation? Likewise, these are all trainee teachers, so we expect them to be able to have correct spelling and correct grammar in their presentations and in their written work. And also, of course, clarity of speech. So, before I started using rubrics, I would be taking notes during each of these presentations and then providing feedback to the students to help them improve. Now I use a rubric. So for each presentation, I have the rubric in front of me, mark the score as the students are going through the presentation, so that by the end of their presentation, I've finished with the marking. No need to go home and write up reports. So there's one of these pages then for each student. So, and this is given to the student then as feedback so that for the next presentation they can address the points where they've lost marks in and improve. So that certainly is something I found of enormous benefit to me in terms of saving time. There's all other types of rubrics. This one for assessing group participation, and again, notice that they have 4 categories. That seems to be the norm and one that I would certainly recommend, as already mentioned. Assessing group work participation is difficult. There's a lot of observational work involved, but that rubric will be of assistance to you. And this is assessing project design in the area of engineering, how well they apply the engineering principles, the interpretation of the results, and so on. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4 categories. A rubric for assessing a master's thesis. This would be helpful for those of you who have to write reports, and as you go through the master's thesis, you could mark up various items on the rubric before finalising your report. And as you can see there, this particular examiner had attributes like the quality of the thesis, the contributions, the publications and potential publications, the quality of the writing, then if there was an oral presentation, how well the student defended the oral presentation, and any other points that struck the examiner as they were reading the thesis. Again, this will help in categorizing the quality of the thesis presented to you. This is a rubric I came across for assessing the quality of program learning outcomes, done for the purposes of external examining. And the criterion, again, 4 categories. The list of program learning outcomes, were they comprehensive? Did they follow national disciplinary standards? In other words, as we mentioned in the discussion on program learning outcomes, were they mapping on to the national qualifications framework? Are the criteria explicit for how the program learning outcomes are assessed? Are they aligned, the alignment with the teaching and learning activities and assessment? Has planning gone into the assessment of the learning outcomes, and have students been made aware of the program learning outcomes? So those were the criteria that this external examiner used in a process of accreditation for a program. That could be very useful. So basically, what we're saying is that the rubric not only does it state the criteria, it states the gradations of quality. It shows what's acceptable, what's outstanding, what's in between, and what's of very poor quality, what's totally unacceptable. The in-between stages can be a bit of a grey area. That's why the 4 categories works. It's about right. Any more than 4, and the area is becoming even greyer. So it's easy to pick the very poor, easy to pick the outstanding, and the grey areas, the 2 and the 3 category, they can require a bit of work at times to distinguish between them. So why are they important rubrics? Well, I've tried to summarise it there on that slide. They're shared with the students. It gives students ownership of the work. It's clearly sharing your understanding, what you expect of the students in their presentation. By giving the rubric to my students before their presentation, they're aware that they will lose marks if there's misspellings, if the grammar is poor, if they're mumbling, if there are mistakes in the scientific content. So it's making everything visible in terms of the learning. And so the advantages is that it lists in for assessment as and for learning. So assessment as learning, part of the learning, and assessment for learning. It's giving students access to clear criteria. It also gives the students the opportunity to provide feedback. They might ask things like, why are you taking marks off us if we make mistakes in spelling or grammar? We are scientists, why are you correcting our English, for example? And then that initiates a good discussion with them. Rubrics are very easy to use, of course, and explain. They're concisely written. And they make it very clear the link between the learning outcome that you're assessing, the teaching and the learning activities that you've engaged in, and, of course, the assessment itself. So linking together those three, remember we were talking about constructive alignment, you have the learning outcomes, the teaching and learning activities, and the assessment, all connected by the double-headed arrows, indicating constructive alignment as per the work of John Biggs. They certainly help to reduce time, as I've already mentioned to you. They certainly can help you to be more consistent. If you're doing the assessment over several weeks, it can help you to be more consistent from 1 week to the next. And certainly those of you who are involved as part of a team and you're marking a huge number of assignments together, the rubrics can be of enormous help to you. And it can also give very good feedback to you. If you find that some areas in the rubric are consistently getting low marks, then you can concentrate on that in your teaching to try to bring up the standard in that particular area. The most wonderful thing about rubrics is that you never have to start with a blank page, because there's mountains of work available, work from other people that they've kindly submitted and shared with the rest of us. And some good websites that I've come across are listed there, and you can download various rubrics, perhaps in your own subject area, and get ideas from them. So to summarize it, a rubric, a scoring tool, or a rating scale shows the performance you expect for work. Two types, holistic and analytic. Analytic are definitely the better of the two. And the rubrics do help students to prepare for the assessment and help you as the teacher to make explicit the link. And they certainly will save you a lot of time in marking and in providing feedback to the students. So I hope you've got some good ideas there about rubrics. Thanks for sticking with me to the final slide. God bless you all, and we'll leave it at that.